the ruling class of every epoch skims off the cream of society's productivity and keeps it for itself, without actually contributing anything to that productivity. They sit around and watch the slaves work. So the idea then is that hierarchical social relations, relations in this case of oppression, are built into every human society that has the division of labor, which is to say that oppression is a concomitant of the division of labor insofar as it allows the extraction of surplus value. What Marx wants to know, his primary concern then, is what is the fate of industrial society now that we are in the machine age, we're in the age of technology, which creates a new and unprecedentedly productive set of social relations. What sort of political or social hierarchy will be generated from that? And in addition to that, how should we think about this? Is it possible to improve the human condition so that we can eliminate the exploitation of one set of human beings by another? And what Marx wants to do, what he sees as the end of history, is the end of the exploitation of one human being by another. He thinks that human beings should pull together in a sort of common effort to exploit exclusively nature to satisfy their desires. And what Marx means by oppression, or the technical term is hegemony, domination, what he means by oppression is the extraction of surplus value by a ruling group that doesn't actually produce anything. He believes that in every epoch, the class that rules the society is in fact a parasitic group of people who live off the real doers. And they exploit these people in order to satisfy their own desires. And not only that, in every case, the ruling ideas of an epoch, here we hear echoes of Hegel and the idea of the Geist. In every age, the ruling ideas of each dominant class are in fact those ideas which reinforce the social relations which allow this kind of exploitation to continue. And that the entire history of human consciousness has been a gradual movement from one conception of a right political order and a right morality to another conception of political order and morality, and that these changes are not arbitrary or not chaotic, and they do not come from some metaphysical Geist. They come from a change in the mode of production. What he means by a mode of production is the characteristic way of producing things, and as a concomitant of that, there is a characteristic way of extracting surplus value. In the ancient world, the mode of production was called slavery, and the societies were divided into the free and the enslaved, masters and slaves. And amazingly enough, in the political theory of the ancients, slavery is taken to be basic and a fine institution. It turns out that that's in the interest of those who created the intellectual activity of the ancient world. And what Marx is saying is that that's a distortion, that is ideology in the pejorative sense of the term, that these people are alienated. What we mean by alienation is necessarily false consciousness in defense of class interests, in defense of the interests of the people that have a parasitic relationship to the real workers. In the ancient world, Aristotle tells us that slavery is natural and we should anticipate it in any well-regulated social order. When we come to the Middle Ages, if we look at someone like Thomas Aquinas, we'll find that there's a divine sanction, a divine support for the monarchs of the Middle Ages. God creates some, not for all of them, but for at least the righteous monarchs, there is in fact divine sanction. There are some monarchs that breaks God's law. We can make exceptions for that. But generally speaking, political order is legitimized in the Middle Ages by referring to the will of God and by saying that aristocrats are aristocrats because God wants them to be. Why else would he have made them aristocrats? The king is the king because, well, the king rules by God's dispensation. The serfs, in fact, almost everybody else, are serfs because that's the way God organized the world. Aquinas, in other words, in his political theory, is legitimizing the particular exploitive social relations characteristic of the society he just happens to be living in. Marx says that this is no accident, that the ruling elite in every society is never going to support and encourage and make possible the extension and elaboration of political theories and moral theories, social theories that undermine the organization of society which benefits them. What that means is we have a sort of feedback loop here between the economy and culture. There's a connection of heteronomy, of self-interest, not again on the basis of individuals, although that sometimes is the case, but we go back to the German idea of the collective subject. For Marx, the collective subject are social classes. The bourgeoisie has an interest. The slaves have an interest. The serfs have an interest. They form a sort of collective subject. So the history of economic development, the movement from slave labor to serfdom, the movement from serfdom to wage labor, carries with it changes in the productive forces of society, and as a necessary concomitant of that, changes in the structure of society, and as a necessary concomitant of that, changes in the way in which societies are legitimized. In the age of slavery, political theory established slavery. In the Middle Ages, we established serfdom. In the age of Adam Smith, in the age of English political economy, what did, at least in Marx's view, what did the English political economists do? They legitimized the society they happened to be born into because they were intellectuals. They were the hired guns of the exploiters. That's what the whole history of Western, or not just Western, of global cultural development amounts to. In every society, there's a group of exploiters and a group of producers that are the vast majority of the people. Among the group of exploiters, there's a group of people that don't actually do manual labor, that don't do the kind of labor that actually makes the world go. They do intellectual labor, and their function in society is to shore up and legitimize the particular kinds of evil social relations characteristic of a society divided into exploiters and producers. Marx thinks that the time has come to eliminate this. The time has come for the heteronomy which exploitive economic relations introduce into our political theory and into our theory of history, the distortions created by alienation, by necessarily false thought in defense of class interests. The time has come to abolish that. And as you may have guessed by the connection to the Hegelian system, when we finally abolish alienation, we will finally abolish classes. When we finally abolish classes, we will have finally abolished exploitive social relations. When we finally abolish exploitive social relations, there will no longer be false consciousness in defense of class interests, and we could finally see what we really are. History, as we have known it prior to this, will be over. We can begin the truly human epoch in human life when there is no longer false consciousness in defense of class interests. Alienation will be gone because the whole human family will understand that they are part of the same species, that they have one interest, the human interest, and that the alleged interest of one segment of society as opposed to that of another is in fact an illusion created by the education that we got growing up in a society divided into hierarchical producers and exploiters who necessarily have false consciousness in defense of an evil society.